Welcome to 3 in 1 Scripture Insight, exploring scripture, human nature, and the deeper questions of existence, hosted by Chang Du.
Well, I mean, if you really stop to think about it, receiving a terminal diagnosis is probably one of the most absolute, concrete moments a human being can experience.
Oh, absolutely. It's a wall.
Right. It's this terrifying wall. And in January 2024, a peer-reviewed oncology journal published a finding that, well, based on everything we traditionally understand about pathology, technically shouldn't even be possible.
Yeah, it completely defies the standard model.
It really does. Like, we were talking about malignant, highly aggressive cancer cells being convinced to simply, forget they were ever cancer in the first place.
And just spontaneously revert back into perfectly healthy functioning cells.
Which is wild. No chemical wrecking balls, no radiation burning the tissue, just like a biological factory reset.
It's staggering because, it completely upends what we call the somatic mutation theory of cancer.
Right, and for those listening, that's basically the idea that once a cell's DNA is mutated, it is on this one-way, totally irreversible trajectory toward destruction.
Exactly. The literature is now documenting that, well, under the right conditions, cellular ruin is actually reversible.
And that concept, that idea of reversibility, is the exact center of gravity for our deep dive today. And I have to say, we are pulling from a really fascinating and, frankly, a pretty unusual stack of sources for this one.
It is definitely a unique pairing.
Yeah, because on the purely empirical side, we have that January 2024 study published in Oncology Reports, and that details the hard molecular biology of what researchers are calling tumor reversion.
Right.
But, and here is where it gets really interesting for you listening, our sources don't just stop at the laboratory door. They pair this incredibly cutting-edge epigenetic science directly with the theological teachings of a figure named Pastor Du.
Which presents this highly integrated framework. The source material takes the biological data regarding how a cell can literally be reprogrammed, and it uses it as the physical evidence to support a spiritual concept.
A concept Pastor Du refers to as reverse engineering.
Right, exactly. It's essentially a structural argument.
Yeah.
The text is claiming that medical science is currently discovering the exact physical levers that faith has basically been pulling all along.
Which is a huge claim. So our mission today is to walk you through that exact progression step by step. We want to start grounded entirely in the hard science.
Of foundational biology.
Right. Like, how does a malignant cell actually uncrumble itself? What are the mechanical, chemical processes that even allow a tumor to revert?
Because it's not magic, it's mechanics.
Exactly. And then from there, we'll follow the source material's argument as it bridges that biological reality straight to the pulpit, exploring the claim that spiritual authority, specifically what the text calls the Jesus Code, functions as the ultimate catalyst to, trigger that biological reset.
It's a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. So whether you're a cellular biologist or someone deep into theology or just someone navigating the really heavy realities of human health, this deep dive is designed to rigorously question how we define a permanent diagnosis.
And I think, honestly, the best place to ground this is in the historical context. Like, how has medicine traditionally treated malignancy for the last century?
Oh, heavily militaristic.
Heavily. The overarching paradigm has been overwhelmingly militaristic. We use terms like search and destroy, right?
Right. Eradicate. Collateral damage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The fundamental assumption driving oncology has been that a cancer cell is a permanently corrupted entity.
Yeah, the general public understanding is basically that a cancer cell is fundamentally broken at the deepest structural level. Like, the DNA has mutated, the cell has become a monster, and, well, you cannot negotiate with a monster.
You can't. You either surgically extract it or you burn it out with radiation.
Or you poison it with chemotherapy, and you just sit there hoping you kill the cancer slightly faster than you kill the patient.
That's the brutal reality of the standard model. But the Oncology Report study fundamentally challenges the necessity of that militaristic approach.
And it does that by proving the existence of what they call phenotypic reversal.
Yes. And to really grasp the weight of this, we have to separate two terms for the listener. We need to separate the genotype from the phenotype.
Okay, let's break that down. Genotype first.
So the genotype is your foundational genetic code. It's the hard-coded blueprint.
The actual DNA sequence.
Right. The phenotype, on the other hand, is the physical expression of that blueprint. It's how the cell is actually behaving in real time in your body.
Okay, so a malignant phenotype is a cell that is actively behaving like a localized terror cell.
That's a good way to put it.
It's replicating without limits. It's refusing to undergo normal cell death, and it's just hijacking local blood supplies to feed itself.
Right. That is the malignant phenotype in action. But the breakthrough here, the massive shift in understanding, is the observation that this malignant behavior, this specific phenotype, is not actually locked in.
Wait, not locked in?
Not locked in. The study demonstrates that you can take a cell that is exhibiting that highly aggressive, invasive phenotype, and through very specific biological triggers, you can convince it to abandon that behavior entirely.
Just abandon it.
Yeah, it stops replicating wildly. It normalizes its physical shape. It actually reintegrates into the surrounding tissue.
Oh, wow.
It reverts to a benign or even a completely normal phenotype.
Okay, I have to push back on this immediately because, I mean, the idea of a cell just sort of changing its mind sounds a little bit like biological magic.
It does sound like magic, I know.
Like, if we use a standard analogy, say a building, traditional treatment looks at a toxic, crumbling building with a cracked foundation, and it brings in a giant wrecking ball to just demolish the whole block.
Right, the chemo approach.
Yeah, but you're saying phenotypic reversal is like watching that exact same burning, crumbling building suddenly purify its own walls, extinguish its own fires, and then have its broken bricks just like levitate back into a perfect structure.
That is essentially what is happening at a cellular level, yes.
But how does a cell actually manage that mechanically? Like, if it's mutated, if the foundation is cracked, how does it even know what a perfect structure is supposed to look like anymore?
And that question, that perceived magic, is actually the crux of the most important biological mechanism highlighted in all our sources. It's called epigenetic reprogramming.
Epigenetic reprogramming.
Right. And the reason the cell knows how to rebuild the perfect structure is because, well, the original blueprint was never actually destroyed in the first place.
Wait, hold on.
The text emphasizes this repeatedly. During the development of these specific cancers, the underlying perfect DNA of the cell remains completely unchanged.
Okay, I have to stop you there. Because isn't cancer, like, by definition, a genetic mutation? If the underlying DNA is perfect, why on earth is there a tumor in the first place?
So the literature does differentiate between what we call driver mutations and passenger mutations, but the larger point the sources are making here revolves around the sheer overwhelming power of the epigenome.
The epigenome, not the genome.
Right, the epigenome is this vast, incredibly complex layer of chemical control that sits entirely on top of your DNA. Your genome, your DNA itself, is the master instruction manual. And every single cell in your body possesses the exact same manual.
Right, like a neuron in my brain has the same underlying DNA as a white blood cell in my arm.
Exactly the same.
But they perform entirely different jobs, they look completely different, they have different lifespans.
Because the epigenome is dictating which chapters of that manual get read and which chapters get permanently glued shut.
Okay.
So when our sources argue that the underlying DNA remains perfect, they are pointing out that in many malignancies, the hardware isn't actually broken. The physical sequence of the DNA itself hasn't been shattered.
The blueprint is intact.
Totally intact. The cancer is actually being driven by a catastrophic failure in the epigenetic software.
Okay, want to make sure I'm visualizing this correctly for the listener. Let's move away from the burning building metaphor for a second. Think of the DNA as a massive, perfectly tuned grand piano.
I like that.
It has all 88 keys. The strings are pristine. The sounding board is totally flawless.
It's a very solid mechanical foundation.
Right. And epigenetics isn't the piano itself. Epigenetics is the sheet music, or actually maybe more accurately, it's like a roll of heavy-duty duct tape.
Duct tape. Okay, let's go with that.
If someone comes in and puts thick duct tape over 40 of the piano keys, completely preventing them from being pressed, the song that gets played is going to sound horrific.
Right, it's going to be total dissonance.
Exactly. It's going to sound like a nightmare. And that nightmare song is the malignant phenotype. That's the cancer.
And the traditional medical response to hearing that nightmare song has been to, well, chop the piano into firewood.
Yes, exactly. But what this 2024 data is saying is, wait, the piano isn't broken. You don't need a chainsaw. You just need to walk up and carefully peel the duct tape off the keys.
That is the perfect analogy for it.
Right, because if you remove those epigenetic blockages, the pianist can play the original masterpiece again. The hardware was uncorrupted the entire time. It was literally just a software glitch.
Which then forces us to look at the exact biological mechanisms of how we actually peel that tape off, because that's what the science is doing.
Right, how do we peel the tape?
The Oncology Report study, as highlighted in our sources, identifies 3 highly specific mechanical pathways to trigger this epigenetic reprogramming.
Okay.
And this reprogramming ultimately results in what the text calls molecular redemption.
Molecular redemption. Wow. That is quite a phrase.
It's powerful, isn't it?
It really is. It carries so much weight, it completely strips away the permanence of the diagnosis. But I want to stay relentlessly focused on the mechanics here.
Let's do it.
How does the body actually execute this redemption? What is the biological equivalent of peeling the tape off the piano keys?
Well, the first mechanism detailed in the sources is the alteration of the cellular microenvironment.
The microenvironment.
Yeah. And to understand how radical this is, we really have to look at how a single cell perceives its reality. Because a cell doesn't just exist in a vacuum, right?
Right, it's not just floating in empty space.
Exactly. It exists in a highly complex, three-dimensional neighborhood called the extracellular matrix.
And for the listener, this is the fluid, the structural proteins, the surrounding blood vessels, immune cells, basically the local ecosystem around the cell.
That's it. And it is a highly communicative ecosystem. Cells have these receptor proteins on their outer surfaces, things called integrins, and receptor tyrosine kinases.
Okay, integrins.
Right. And these proteins physically reach out and grab onto the extracellular matrix. They're constantly measuring their surroundings.
Measuring what exactly?
Measuring the mechanical tension of the tissue, measuring the acidity, the oxygen levels, and taking in chemical signals from all the neighboring cells.
So they are essentially reading the room.
They are constantly reading the room.
Yeah.
And they translate the physical and chemical state of that room into internal signals that travel all the way down to the nucleus, directly influencing the epigenome.
Oh, wow. So the outside environment talks directly to the tape on the piano keys.
Directly. And what the researchers demonstrated is that a malignant cell's behavior is heavily dictated by a corrupted, highly inflammatory microenvironment.
Let me make sure I'm tracking this. So if a cell is sitting in a toxic neighborhood, surrounded by distress signals and inflammation, the epigenome adapts to that chaos by playing the nightmare song.
Yes.
It turns on survival and replication genes, and it turns off the standard regulatory genes just to survive the bad neighborhood.
That is exactly what happens.
So,
But the science shows that if you physically take that exact same malignant cell and place it into a healthy, perfectly balanced microenvironment,
wait, physically move it.
or if you therapeutically alter its current environment to mimic a healthy one, the cell's sensors read that new data.
Okay.
The integrins report back that the tension is normal now. The chemical receptors report that the inflammation is totally gone.
So it's getting new inputs.
Right. And this massive influx of healthy data physically forces the epigenome to update its software.
It's a biological peer pressure.
It really is. The environment literally dictates the expression of the DNA.
But how does that actually reverse a tumor in practice? Does the cell just say, oh, hey, it's nice out today, I guess I'll stop dividing and forming a mass?
It's a cascade effect. Once the epigenome receives the signal that the environment is healthy again, it begins removing the duct tape from the tumor suppressor genes.
Okay, so it starts untaping the keys.
Right. The cell regains access to its underlying perfect DNA. It looks at its own behavior, realizes it is expressing a malignant phenotype that is no longer necessary or appropriate for its healthy surroundings, and it undergoes spontaneous reversion.
To match the neighborhood.
To match the neighborhood.
That is staggering. Just the idea that you can neutralize a terminal cell just by changing what it's physically touching.
It's a total paradigm shift.
But the text doesn't stop with just the environment.
Yeah, it goes deeper.
Yeah, it places a massive emphasis on a very specific, almost bureaucratic-sounding target. Downregulating the TCTP protein.
ECTTP, yes.
What exactly is TCTP, and why is the source text so obsessed with it?
So TCTP stands for Translationally Controlled Tumor Protein.
Okay, quite a mouthful.
It is. But to understand why it's the absolute linchpin here, we have to first understand a process called apoptosis.
Apoptosis. That's programmed cell death, right?
Exactly. Normal, healthy cells have a built-in self-destruct button, and it's heavily regulated by a specific protein called P53.
Okay, P53 is the button.
Right. If a normal cell detects that its DNA is damaged or that it's starting to replicate out of control, P53 initiates apoptosis. The cell just politely dismantles itself for the good of the whole organism.
It falls on its sword.
It falls on its sword.
Right.
But malignant cells absolutely refuse to do this.
Right, because they are selfish.
Exactly. And one of the primary reasons they refuse is TCTP. TCTP is what we call a highly conserved survival protein.
Survival protein.
Yeah. In a normal, healthy scenario, it protects cells from dying prematurely when they're under temporary stress. But in a cancer scenario, TCTP expression just explodes.
It goes into overdrive.
The cancer cell basically floods itself with TCTP.
So what is TCTP mechanically doing to stop the cell from dying? Is it like physically blocking that self-destruct button you mentioned?
It actively inhibits the apoptotic pathways. It physically binds to and suppresses the machinery that would normally execute the cell.
Oh, wow.
It's sending this continuous deafening signal to the cell saying, survive at all costs, multiply, do not die under any circumstances.
Okay, well, here's my question then. If TCTP is basically placing a heavy brick on the cancer's accelerator while simultaneously cutting the brake lines, why hasn't the pharmaceutical industry spent the last 50 years developing a drug to just nuke TCTP?
That's the logical next question.
Right, like if it's the master survival switch, why is this some novel finding in 2024?
Well, the challenge is that TCTP isn't exclusive to cancer.
Ah.
Remember I said it's a highly conserved protein. That means evolutionary biology has kept it around across almost all species because it is absolutely vital for normal, everyday, healthy cellular function.
So my healthy cells are using it right now.
Exactly. Your healthy cells need TCTP to manage daily stress, to facilitate normal growth. If you indiscriminately nuke TCTP systemically across the whole body,
You cause catastrophic collateral damage to the healthy tissues.
right, it's the wrecking ball problem all over again.
Nice.
You can't just carpet bomb the protein without killing the patient,
Okay, I see.
which is why the mechanism highlighted in the 2024 research is so elegant. The goal isn't to eradicate TCTP entirely. The goal is to downregulate it, specifically within the tumor cells.
Regulate, so just turn the volume down.
Exactly.
Right.
When researchers successfully downregulate TCTP, when they simply lower the volume of that screaming survive and multiply signal, the malignant cell experiences this profound shift.
It finally takes a breath.
Without the overwhelming pressure of TCTP suppressing its natural regulatory systems, the cell's underlying mechanisms can actually wake back up.
The P53 pathways.
Right, the P53 pathways become accessible again. The cell looks around, recognizes its own abnormal state, and instead of just immediately dying, the lowered TCTP levels allow it to access its uncorrupted DNA blueprint.
And it undergoes phenotypic reversion.
Exactly. It reverts to a benign state.
Man, it's really the difference between trying to stop a speeding car by blowing it up with a bazooka versus just gently lifting the driver's foot off the gas pedal so they can steer back into the correct lane.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. It's a very precise mechanical adjustment.
Okay, so we have the microenvironment, we have TCTP downregulation, and that precision you mentioned is mirrored in the third mechanism, the sources detail, which is altering methylation.
Right, methylation.
Now, this term gets thrown around a lot in the biohacking world, usually in relation to like anti-aging protocols. But the text treats it as the ultimate locking mechanism for cancer.
It really is.
Walk me through the actual physical chemistry, what methylation is doing to our DNA piano.
Okay, so DNA methylation is the literal duct tape in your piano analogy. At a chemical level, methylation involves the addition of methyl group, which is just one carbon atom bonded to 3 hydrogen atoms, so CH3, directly onto the DNA molecule.
Okay, CH3, just a tiny little molecule.
Very tiny. And specifically, these methyl groups attach to cytosine bases that are located next to guanine bases in areas of the DNA known as CpG islands.
CpG islands, okay, so it's a physical molecular tag attaching itself to the DNA strand.
Exactly.
But how does a tiny cluster of carbon and hydrogen atoms dictate whether a cell becomes a lethal tumor? It seems too small to do that.
It does seem small, but location is everything. These CpG islands are predominantly located in the promoter regions of our genes.
And what's a promoter region?
The promoter region is like the ignition switch for the gene. In order for a gene to be expressed for that specific chapter of the instruction manual to be read, proteins called transcription factors need to physically bind to that promoter region.
Okay, I'm following. So they need to put the key in the ignition.
Right. But when a methyl group attaches to the promoter region, it physically bulks up the space. It actually alters the three-dimensional structure of the DNA just enough that the transcription factors can no longer fit into the slot.
Oh, so the ignition is blocked.
The ignition is blocked. And furthermore, these methyl groups attract other proteins that come in and tightly coil the DNA around these spools called histones, physically burying the gene so it absolutely cannot be accessed.
The gene is completely silenced.
Effectively silenced, yeah.
Okay, so in a healthy cell, methylation is actually a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Because it keeps, say, a skin cell from trying to grow teeth by keeping the teeth genes taped shut.
It is absolutely vital for normal human development. You need methylation. But in cancer, The methylation machinery goes completely haywire.
How so?
It's a phenomenon called global hypomethylation combined with localized hypermethylation.
Okay, you're going to have to translate that for me.
Sure. Basically, the cell randomly removes the tape from genes that promote aggressive growth genes that should absolutely be locked away.
Okay, that's bad.
Right, that's the hypomethylation. And at the exact same time, it slaps layers and layers of methyl tape over the tumor suppressor genes.
Oh, wow. So the emergency brakes are taped shut and the accelerators are completely untaped.
Precisely. It's a worst-case scenario.
So when the text talks about altering methylation to achieve tumor reversion, it's talking about chemical interventions that go in and physically strip those CH3 groups off the tumor suppressor genes,
Yeah.
which allows the cell to finally read its own safety protocols, I guess.
That is the mechanical reality of epigenetic therapy. By removing those specific methyl groups, you expose the uncorrupted DNA beneath. The cell can finally transcribe the proteins it needs to normalize its behavior.
Okay, we need to pause here for a second and just take stock of where we are.
It's a lot of biology.
It is, but it's crucial. We have established, through rigorous, documented molecular biology, that terminal disease states are not necessarily permanent.
Right.
By changing the microenvironment, downregulating the TCTP protein, and stripping away rogue methylation, you can literally force a malignant cell to undergo a factory reset.
Molecular redemption.
Molecular redemption, exactly. But, and this is a huge but, this is the exact moment where our source material makes a massive, almost jarring leap.
Yes, the transition from the laboratory to the teachings of Pasteur Du.
Right. Section 4 of our deep dive, reverse engineering.
This is where it gets really profound.
It does, but I want to acknowledge that for a secular scientist listening to this, or someone strictly grounded in empirical data, the text is about to introduce a major friction point.
Understandably so.
Because the sources take this highly technical, peer-reviewed epigenetic data from 2024, and they use it as the foundational architecture for a theology sermon.
They do.
How does the text actually justify bridging that enormous gap without completely abandoning the scientific method?
Well, the fascinating thing is that the source material doesn't view this as abandoning the scientific method at all. It actually views it as fulfilling it.
Fulfilling it. Okay, how?
The bridge between the two is constructed entirely around the concept of the uncorrupted blueprint.
The pristine DNA.
Right. The text argues that the sheer existence of this underlying perfect DNA, the fact that a horribly diseased system can technically be reverted to a pristine state, points to a philosophical and spiritual necessity.
Which is what?
Intelligent design.
Ah, if there is a factory reset, there had to be a factory.
Precisely the logic. The text uses the phrase reverse engineering. Think about it in the mechanical world. If you reverse engineer a highly complex piece of technology like a microchip, you are slowly peeling back the layers to discover the original schematics drawn by the engineer.
Right. You're working backwards to figure out how it was built.
Right. And the ability to reverse engineer that chip proves the chip is not a product of random, chaotic assembly. It was designed with deep intention.
Okay, I see where this is going. So Pasteur Du's teachings apply that exact same logic to the epigenome.
Exactly.
The tumor is the chaotic assembly. But the fact that we can peel back the methylation tape, downregulate the rogue proteins, and find a perfectly coded, pristine DNA sequence underneath, the text is arguing that this is biological proof of a divine engineer.
Yes, the scientific reality of tumor reversion serves as the physical confirmation of Pasteur Du's spiritual premise.
That is a wild connection to make.
It is, but it's structurally very sound within the text's framework. The text positions science and faith, not as these gladiators in an arena where one must defeat the other, but rather as different languages describing the exact same mechanism.
Science maps the gears, while faith points to the one turning the crank.
Exactly.
There's a phrase the text uses here, holding on to the memory of health.
Oh, yes. I love that phrase.
Honestly, the psychological impact of framing disease this way is staggering to me, because when a patient gets a terminal diagnosis, the mental paradigm is almost always one of irreversible decay.
You feel like your body has betrayed you permanently.
Right. The body is perceived as ruined. But if you shift that paradigm to this idea of reverse engineering, if you believe that beneath the pathology, your actual cells are actively holding on to a perfect memory of health, just waiting for the right code to unlock it, that completely rewrites how a patient perceives their own body.
It entirely replaces a trajectory of despair with a trajectory of restoration. The source material argues that the physical body, at its deepest genetic level, inherently desires to return to its original uncorrupted design. The malignancy is viewed as a temporary occupation, not a permanent identity.
I want to be incredibly clear for the listener here, maintaining our role as an impartial guide to this text.
Of course.
The source material is not saying ignore the science and just pray. It's not anti-medicine.
Not at all.
It is saying that the biological mechanisms of epigenetics, the integrins reading the microenvironment, the p53 pathways waking up, the methyl groups detaching from the promoter regions, these are the actual physical gears of a spiritual reality.
They are the how to the spiritual why.
Right.
The framework presented by Pastor Deuce suggests that spiritual authority operates through the medium of biology. Epigenetic reprogramming is simply the observable mechanical footprint of molecular redemption.
Which inevitably forces us to confront the final ultimate assertion made by the sources.
The big question.
Right. Because if we have this incredible biological machinery capable of reversing a terminal state, and if we have this pristine DNA waiting to be read under all the tape, what actually flips the switch?
Right.
Like in a laboratory setting, a scientist uses complex chemical compounds to alter methylation or downregulate TCTP. But in the framework of Pastor Deuce's theology, what initiates the reverse engineering process?
This brings us to what the text defines as the ultimate code.
The ultimate code.
The sources assert that spiritual authority serves as a definitive catalyst for triggering this biological restoration. And specifically, the text explicitly declares that the name of Jesus acts as that ultimate code.
Okay, let's unpack the actual mechanics of that claim because, let's be honest, it is the heaviest lift in the entire source material.
It requires a massive leap, yes.
How does the text mechanistically justify an auditory or spiritual concept, the name of Jesus interacting with a physical methyl group on a DNA strand? Like, the skeptic is going to ask, are you saying a prayer is physically knocking carbon atoms off a gene promoter?
Right, and to answer that, the text constructs a hierarchy of authority.
Okay, a hierarchy. Walk me through that.
So in the biological realm, we've established that the epigenome holds authority over the genome.
Right. The tape dictates how the piano is played.
Exactly. The epigenome dictates how the DNA is expressed. Well, the source material argues that there is a higher level of authority that holds jurisdiction over the epigenome itself.
And that would be the spiritual realm.
Exactly. It's a chain of command.
Okay.
The text frames the name of Jesus not merely as a religious comfort or like a meditative focus for the patient, but as a functional administrative password.
An administrative password, wow.
If the DNA is the hardware, and the epigenome is the software, and the cancer is a devastating software bug, the text proposes that spiritual authority is the root access code.
It's the admin override.
It is the administrative override that commands the software to debug and reset.
It's fascinating how heavily the text leans on the language of information technology and molecular biology to validate its theological premise.
It uses very modern framing.
It does. Words like code, reprogram, blueprint, and trigger. It doesn't treat faith as this ethereal, ghostly, abstract thing. It treats faith as a highly specific functional interface that interacts directly with human biology.
And that is the core synthesis of the source material. It creates a unified theory where the spiritual initiation produces a cascading biological reality.
So it's cause and effect.
Exactly. When the ultimate code is applied, the text argues that it asserts spiritual jurisdiction over the cellular environment. And this jurisdiction is what triggers the physical alteration of the microenvironment, the downregulation of TCTP, and the stripping of aberrant methylation.
It's basically arguing that the miracles of healing we read about in theological texts are not violations of the laws of physics or biology.
No, they're the highest mastery of them.
That is exactly the implication. Wow.
It posits that spiritual authority simply knows how to pull the epigenetic levers that science is only just beginning to map out in 2024.
So the text views the oncologist altering methylation in a petri dish as basically discovering a backdoor into a system that spiritual authority has always held the master key to.
That's a perfect summary. It positions faith not as anti-science, but as super-science.
Super sense.
Yeah, the ultimate uncorrupted understanding of the biological machine.
That is a massive paradigm shift. It demands a complete reevaluation of how we categorize information in our society.
Because we are so trained to put things in boxes.
Right. We put empirical oncology in one box, and we put theology in a completely separate box, and we say, never the twain shall meet.
But the source material shatters those boxes. It insists they're describing the exact same event from two different vantage points.
Okay, let's pull all of this together and look at the massive terrain we've covered today, because we really went deep.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started at the absolute cutting edge of empirical data. The January 2024 oncology reports demonstrating that malignant cells are not on a one-way trip to destruction.
The realization of phenotypic reversal. The empirical proof that cellular ruin is, in fact, reversible.
Right. And we dug into the mechanical reality of how that happens. We looked at the piano keys, the uncorrupted underlying DNA, and how epigenetic reprogramming by altering the extracellular microenvironment, suppressing the TCTP survival protein, and removing the methyl tags from gene promoters can literally reboot a cell to its factory settings.
Which established the biological foundation for Pasteur Du's concept of reverse engineering.
The philosophical leap that an uncorrupted blueprint necessitates an intelligent designer.
And that molecular redemption is a physical reality in our bodies.
Right. Culminating in the text's ultimate, highly provocative claim that this entire biological cascade of epigenetic reprogramming can be initiated by spiritual authority. The Jesus Code acting as the root access password to force the cellular software to reset.
It is an incredibly dense, challenging framework.
It is. But regardless of where you, the listener, sit on the spectrum of faith or skepticism, there is a fundamental takeaway here that I think changes how we view our own existence.
I agree. I think it's the universality of the uncorrupted blueprint.
Exactly.
The science alone dictates that beneath whatever expression of damage or pathology you are currently experiencing, your core foundation remains completely intact.
We all deal with corruption, and it's not always a cellular malignancy.
No, not at all.
Sometimes the tumor in our lives is toxic behavioral loops or severe trauma, anxiety, or circumstances that feel absolutely hopelessly irreversible. We look at our lives, we see the crumbling building, and we think, it's over. Bring in the wrecking ball. I am fundamentally broken.
But the reality of epigenetics proves that the damage is merely an expression.
Yes.
And expressions can be altered. The hardware is sound. The capacity for reversion, for returning to a state of profound health and balance, is quite literally written into your biology.
Yeah.
You are never fundamentally broken at your core.
The blueprint is holding on to the memory of health.
It is.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Something to turn over in your mind long after this deep dive ends. We spent a significant amount of time detailing how a single cell's physical microenvironment, the tension, the chemical signals, the surrounding neighborhood, can physically alter its DNA expression and reverse a malignant state.
Right, the peer pressure effect.
Exactly. And we explored the source text's claim that spiritual authority and internal belief act as a catalyst for that exact change.
The intersection of what surrounds us and what we believe.
Right. So if a microscopic cell can change its entire destiny just by reading the room, ask yourself, what room are you putting yourself in?
That's a great question.
How much might your own internal microenvironments, the cyclical thoughts you entertain, the beliefs you hold about your own permanence, the words you speak into your own life, and the emotional energy you allow to surround you, how much might those unseen forces be acting as your own personal epigenetic triggers?
Are those unseen forces applying the methyl tape, or are they pulling it off?
Exactly. Are you actively, unconsciously rewriting your biological reality every single day? And if so, what happens the moment you decide to change the code?
Thank you for listening to 3-in-1 Scripture Insight. If this episode inspired you, consider following the podcast and sharing it with others.